Frank, good morning. Before we turn to what's happening around the world, I've been playing throughout the show all of these calls to alarm by the left. We've got the Newsbusters did a great roundup. 386 times they've said that we're in a constitutional crisis. AOC saying climate change will probably kill her. Bill Nye saying the world is on effing fire. The list, CNN suggesting that white supremacists are taking over the country and could kill us all. It is one mass hysteria after the next. This has been the story of this moment. And in the meantime, we have actual stuff we need to deal with. We need to deal with Iran. We need to deal with China. We have a lot to do, and yet we are focused on these things that are, if not fake news, they're so wildly exaggerated. And yet I feel like I'm a broken record bringing this up on the show.
Well, you are a broken record bringing it up on the show, but that's because you have to bring it up on the show because that's what you're being confronted with every single day. And Alex, I'm sorry to say, excuse me, this is not an accident, comrades. This is a distraction that I think their pollsters and their focus groups and their media consultants are telling the left is necessary for them to have a chance of commanding the support of the American people. If they divide them enough, if they radicalize them enough, if they create enough distractions that cause them to think this is the most important thing in the world, a constitutional crisis and so on, then the American people won't have the common sense to realize that they need adults who are capable of addressing real problems facing this country, many of which are increasingly mortal threats to our people, to our society, to our country. And that's what I think we will see teeing up here with the help of, I'm quite sure, Breitbart and people like you, as the choice before Americans in 2020. Is it going to be, smoke and mirrors, distractions, lunatic fringe nonsense, or is it going to be adults contending with the world as it really is and protecting us from it?
All right, so let's turn to some of the specifics here, and why don't we go to China, and let's play a clip. Let's set the table with the president boarding Marine One. Let's play 1B here, Mr. Paul.
We're having a little squabble with China because we've been treated very unfairly for many, many decades, for actually a long time. And it should have been handled a long time ago, and it wasn't, and we'll handle it now. I think it's going to turn out extremely well. We're in a very strong position. We are the piggy bank that everybody likes to take advantage of or take from, and we can't let that happen anymore. We've been losing for many years anywhere from $300 billion to $500 billion a year with China and trade with China. We can't let that happen. The relationship I have with President Xi is extraordinary. It's really very good, but he's for China and I'm for the USA, and it's very simple. We are, again, in a very, very strong position. If they want to make a deal, it could absolutely happen. But in the meantime, a lot of money is being made by the United States and a lot of strength is being shown. This has never happened to China before.
And Frank, I think this is an interesting summary here. I think the president is trying to maintain some diplomacy, which is smart. He seems very confident, which he should be. I think that we've got the upper hand in this trade fight. But putting pressure on China geopolitically is such a big deal. And we had a great interview with Gordon Chang earlier this week where he said if you look at the way the Chinese are treating the Muslim Uyghurs, putting them in what they refer to as re-education camps, but what we would know as concentration camps, he thinks they shouldn't even be treated as a legitimate state at this point. So it's very welcome to see the president put some pressure on them. But give me your assessment on how things are going from your view.
Well, I'm a huge fan of Gordon Chang, and I think he's exactly right on this. And that would be the only point on which I would quibble with the president in what he said there, Alex, and that is this isn't a little squabble with Communist China and its party leadership. This is an existential challenge of our time. Ronald Reagan said every generation has one. And we have been contending to varying degrees with, the Islamists and the Russians and so on. The Chinese are the people, and I don't mean the Chinese people. I mean the people running the country who give the average Chinese absolutely no say over what's happening in their lives or in their country. The Communist Party of China is an existential threat to our country and to freedom more generally around the world. Trade is one element of this. And the president's absolutely right that for decades the Chinese have been taking advantage of successive U.S. governments and our business community and our people, for that matter, by exploiting the, I believe, naive at best and at worst, completely malfeasant idea that they were just another supplier. It's just all about, who's going to provide the lowest cost in the global marketplace, and we can safely export our manufacturing base, our technologies, our businesses to them, and it'll all just work out swimmingly. It was crazy, Alex. It was crazy. But unfortunately, in the course of all of that, what we have also wound up doing is financing, underwriting, and otherwise enabling the buildup of this very dangerous nation under the Chinese Communist Party. And that's not a little squabble. That's a huge problem. Nobody has dealt with this better than Donald Trump. Not since Nixon, at least, and arguably not since Truman. We now have a president who I think is pretty clear-eyed about this. He's obviously walking a fine line in that clip that you just played, trying to keep the markets from freaking out and so on. But he's, I think, clear-eyed about the true nature of the Chinese Communist Party and the threat it poses.
But I think this is a very significant thing he's doing because he's under incredible pressure, not just to manage our geopolitical success, put pressure on China, defend the American worker, but he's also doesn't want the markets to tank. That is his silver bullet for 2020. No one's going to catch him if the economy stays where it is, and if the economy falters, and all of a sudden he's going to be vulnerable. So he doesn't want to blow up the economy, figuratively speaking. But he's navigating this very well. When you've got a press who's dying to jump on him for anything, they haven't managed to find a good angle though at this one, Frank, which is a very interesting sign because they have not had a compelling narrative that he's blowing this because he's not blowing it. Things look okay.
Alex, we've talked about this before. We've created a committee on the present danger China.
Yes, of course.
To try to help elevate these sorts of issues, and presentdangerchina.org has a lot of information about all of this. But you're right, and what I think we're really now looking at is a considerable degree of bipartisan understanding of the danger that China represents, with the notable outrider, at least for the moment, of Joe Biden, who, let's face it, was bought.
Yes.
Over $1 billion, I believe, was flowing through his son from the Chinese. So he's bought. So,
Frank, you pause on that word like it's some wild word. Compare what Joe Biden, whose son got a $1 billion deal for his business from China while Joe and Barack Obama were softening our policy towards China. And all of a sudden, his son gets a sweetheart $1 billion deal that other banks that with much more experience and much more credibility would never have seen in a million years. And you pause on the word bought as if it's some sort of a big deal. Look at what they said to Donald Trump, that he was Putin's puppet. He was Putin's puppet because Putin bought $100,000 worth of Facebook ads.
Well, and had conversations about Trump Tower in Moscow and a lot of other stuff. I mean, this is the most selective outrage I think I've ever seen, and the fact that this guy is at least for the moment, I can't imagine this is going to stand, but for the moment, the leading candidate of the Democratic presidential wannabes is unbelievable. I can't. Don't even get to Ukraine. We're talking about just China. This is a fatal problem for this guy. But anyway, it's making him, I think, say, nothing to see here, folks. No worries with China. They're terrific people, and the Chinese are terrific people. But their party, Communist Party of China, is not terrific people. And unless you've been bought, or unless you think you're going to get paid down the road, generally speaking, even a lot of prominent Democrats are now saying this is a problem with us. China represents a strategic threat to our country. We're all about that at the Committee on the Present Danger of China, I can tell you, but we need to get the American people alert, and I so appreciate what you do at Breitbart in this regard to make it clear it's not just about trade. Even if we get that absolutely right, and I hope the president will, we've still got a host of other very, very serious challenges from the Chinese communists.
Okay, and give us a few examples, Frank. We've been through them on the show, but they're worth repeating.
Well, let me just give you one. And it's hard to overstate the importance of this. 5G is the shorthand for fifth-generation wireless technology.
Yes.
As things stand right now, Alex, the Chinese Communist Party, doing business as Huawei, is running the table worldwide in installing technologies that will enable the Chinese literally to have access to data and to be able to manipulate that data in ways that can do everything from extend their surveillance and espionage and technology theft and influence operations to literally being able to kill us, because it will operate something called the Internet of Things. And we will rely critically, individual Americans, among many, many others around the world, will rely critically upon Chinese technology, which can be, again, utilized for malevolent purposes by the leadership there to harm us, to disrupt our economy, perhaps, to simply exploit what they will learn to our detriment. And that's just one example of what they're up to. And we're not competing right now, though I am happy to say I'm seeing signs that the Trump administration is finally beginning to take the steps that will actually give reality to the sort of vision that the president has articulated, the general direction he's set, which is we have to compete effectively with the Chinese in this regard. And I'm hoping that we will shortly see the Defense Department, other agencies of the U.S. government, the private sector working on a approach that will actually not only compete but decisively defeat the Chinese bid on 5G.
Frank Gaffney again is with me, Executive Chairman of the Center for Security Policy. This 5G issue is so big, we're going to come back to this a lot as time goes on, but it is a very scary warning here, which is that as everything gets connected via internet, if the Chinese are controlling the internet, then that would clearly, if it comes to it at a time of war, that would be, or even at a time of peace, they'll be getting information, and at a time of war, it could make us physically vulnerable. So this is something that we have to look out for this. Frank,
Absolutely.
I want to. We had a great moment on the show yesterday with Claire Lopez from your shop yesterday, where I brought up this anonymously sourced New York Times article where it claimed that the president was considering sending 120,000 troops to the Middle East. And I asked Claire what she thought of it. Was she familiar with the report? She said, I hadn't heard of the report, but it doesn't sound very credible. And I said, I haven't been through it very closely, but it doesn't sound very credible. And then hours later, the president came out and said, yeah, it's not credible. And these are the little moments on the show that I'm really proud of, because it shows that, we're bringing you the right people, because Claire instantly knew something was up with this. But Iran is a problem. We want to keep putting pressure on them. Secretary of State's been pretty vocal about that recently. But the idea that we're going to be, sending over 100,000 ground forces in imminently, I think is classic art of the deal that Trump would allow that to be out there. In fact, he said that, well, if we're going to do it, we'll send even more. I think that's great art of the deal, saber rattling. But give me your assessment on what the situation is in the Middle East right now and what options we should have available to us.
Well, let me just say, I'm delighted you had Claire on, and I think that her reading of this is right. I will say, there are contingency plans in the Pentagon, and there may have been some brief to the White House about what you would do in the event you had to take decisive military action against Iran. I don't think that's what we're doing. I don't think that's what we will do, hopefully.
But it is an option if the situation changes, which is, of course, what we want. Yeah.
Of course. And ultimately, the president's probably right that you'd need more than 120,000. But here's the point, Alex. Well, 2 points. One is, you said anonymously sourced. One of the things that I took away from that article was they said that they had 6 different people with access to this information who had talked to them anonymously about it. That suggests to me the deep state at work here. This was, I believe, an effort to undercut the president, cause controversy for him and, Ambassador John Bolton, his national security advisor, and so on. 6 people, apparently, leaked this information. But secondly, I would just say, what I think this president is all about, and I believe he's being helped in this regard tremendously by John Bolton and, of course, Mike Pompeo, is trying to create conditions under which the people of Iran can finally get their country back, not through our force of arms, but through their own acts of rebellion against this regime, which oppresses them terribly, as well as threatens the rest of us. And that's the great hope here. It was so tragic, and you guys covered this intensively back in the day, when Barack Obama refused even to acknowledge, let alone express any solidarity with the so-called Green Revolution in Iran, when millions and millions of people were in the streets. That was a missed opportunity, but it's come again. The pressure that Donald Trump is applying is crushing this regime, and it happens to be coinciding, interestingly enough, in recent days, Alex, with acts of God, including immense amounts of flooding in the breadbasket of Iran and hordes of locusts, billions of locusts that have flown in from Saudi Arabia. And this is an amazing, I believe, convergence that gives rise to a real opportunity. I think part of what we're seeing out of the Iranian regime is they're desperate. They're panicking. They know, I think, the end is at hand, and I hope to God it comes peacefully and with our strong support, but not with military force being needed.
Of course, we'll keep an eye on that as well. Frank, let's turn to Venezuela. This is a tough one here because it just is starting to look like the opposition forces were not ready for prime time here. It looks like that Maduro has held on to a certain level of power, even though a lot of the world is recognizing Juan Guaido as a legitimate president. Maduro still basically seems to have control over the military. So it is there is. I'm a little discouraged there, but are there any takeaways from this? Where do you think things stand in Venezuela?
Well, I think, as I've said to you, Maduro is one bullet away from being out of there. And that's really just a question of at what point do the people around him decide he's got to go. I think it's literally probably the end game. It is discouraging. I mean, nobody but the government and its foreign supporters, notably the Praetorian Guard that the Cubans have given the Maduro regime, that protects him, that enables him, and Hezbollah and Basiji units from Iran and the Russians and then to some extent the Chinese. I mean, these are the people who are basically propping up this government. And I was fascinated by a piece in Breitbart the other day about how it probably was the Cubans who brought us Maduro in the first place. They had Chavez there for his terminal care, but Maduro was certainly a guy they knew they would be able to control and have ever since. That's what we're up against here. It's not the military of Venezuela, I think, so much as it is these foreign forces, including, the commissars that the Cubans have now implanted in the Venezuelan military to try to maintain control over it. This is, I think, down to the short strokes. It's not as close to that as we would like, and there's still probably a lot of rough country between now and when the inevitable takes place, which is the people of Venezuela will be freed from this nightmare that has taken one of the most wealthy countries on the planet and turned it into just another impoverished socialist disaster. And this is, I think, going to be, as I say, probably still some time to play out. But that's, I believe, what will inevitably happen here.
Yeah, it's so crucial, especially in light of the rise of at least socialism in pop culture. It's hard to say that there's socialism in government quite yet in the United States, but the pop culture affection for socialism that has emerged, when you have one of these socialist utopias, it should be one of the wealthiest countries on earth, as you say, France. I'm sorry, Frank, as in Venezuela, and now we've got it's a collapsing, failed state where there are people can't get basic medicine and food for their babies. Frank, last one for today. Afghanistan's Taliban's top peace negotiator said the U.S. is on the verge of defeat. Is that true? Is it just tough talk? And if so, what is the state of play in Afghanistan?
Well, I have to say I worry about it. The Taliban is clearly feeling its oats. They put a bunch of those guys that were let out by the Obama administration from Gitmo on their negotiating team. That was kind of a spit-in-your-face maneuver, but I think this speaks their confidence that they're going to prevail now. I really worry. I mean, I know Zal Khalil is out a bit, and I think he's a nice guy, but I really worry about what he is doing as our lead negotiator, cutting out the government of Afghanistan that we nominally regard as the legitimate government and making deals behind their back. It is just so reminiscent, Alex, of what Henry Kissinger did when the United States government basically in his person was selling out the government of South Vietnam. They were cut out and ultimately sold out by Kissinger, and the rest, as they say, is history. In this case, I think what you're looking at is a restoration of the Taliban regime in short order, and the full-fledged return of that operation to, international terrorism, not just a horror for the people of Afghanistan. Doesn't have to be that way, shouldn't be that way. I hope the president doesn't want to sell out the Afghan government, such as it is, to enable, a restoration of this nightmare that we've been fighting against for 17 years.
Frank Gaffney, securefreedom.org, counterinjihad.com. Give us that China website one more time.
PresidentDangerChina.org.
Very good. Thanks, Frank. Catch you next week.
Great. Thank you.